Wolfgang Ischinger, good to have you back. Thank you. I had the pleasure of being with you in your fantastic Munich Security Conference, and I wanted to start with that because it was not only an honor to be there, but I was interested in that title that you gave it, Post-Truth, Post-West, Post-Order. Now that was provocative because we don't know whether we have all of those posts, but we are struggling with something. You know, Lewis Carroll, wrote once, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
Exactly.
How did you come out of that meeting? Do we know where we're going?
Not really.
Yeah.
We had a long discussion before we decided on this particular title. I think I was the one who insisted on the question marks. For exactly that reason. We are not exactly sure that we are in a post-West order. Some people claim that. Some people claim we live in a post-truth situation. Does that describe the totality of our current reality? But I think, quite frankly, that we were absolutely right in choosing this triple title with the question marks, because as it turned out, among the key themes of what was discussed in Munich and what is being discussed in Brussels and in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, is the question, how do we deal with a situation where facts are equally important as lies and hard to distinguish one from the other? What about the perception that the global order is coming apart? Who is taking care of it? If it's not the U.S. anymore, is there anybody else? Not so clear. So I think the title was okay. It was supposed to be provocative, and we did try to. We are trying to make the discussions in Munich more productive by beginning to try to not simply let statesmen read their speeches, but by trying to confront them with somebody or something that could be interpreted as a challenger or a challenge, either a person or a thesis or a piece of paper, to make it more provocative, to bring out not only a written statement from them, but a discussion at a time when I think we had in Munich this year more open questions on important strategic questions than at any time in the recent past that I can remember.
Well, let me pick you up on that, because one of the things that happened there at the meeting was that this was the coming out party for the new administration, as it always is every 4 to 8 years. And we saw Mr. Pence, we saw Mr. Mattis, and I think we were all waiting to see whether there would be more dialogue. There was more of a presentation on the American side than there was a readiness to get into Q&A, in contrast to the Chancellor, who was there for a good long time asking questions and answering questions. So when you go back and you say, well, gee, a lot of people were holding their breath when this team got to Munich. I mean, what are we going to hear? Do you think on the whole everybody said, okay, we get it. There's a number of voices in Washington right now. The cabinet is coming together. It may be too soon to know about what exact way the U.S. is going to go forward. But were you more, shall we say, less anxious than you were before the meeting took place?
I think that if the sentiment, generally speaking, 2 days before the conference was, gee, that we have so many open questions, so many unanswered questions, I'm sure that most participants went away from Munich with the impression, well, at least some of the questions have been answered. Certainly not all. So, or let me put it this way, I actually said in one of my announcements before the conference, we live at a moment of maximum uncertainties, maximum number of uncertainties. Because of what's been said at the conference, I think that maximum adjective can be deleted and maybe replaced by a certain number of uncertainties still exist. That's what we need to work on. But let me add a second point. It was, of course, extremely reassuring for Europeans, for Germans, that the Trump administration, within a few weeks of coming into office, decided to send such a respectable delegation to Munich, led by the Vice President personally. And equally important, I kept explaining to European members of the audience that you will not find a place anywhere in the world at any moment of this year outside the United States where you will have 12 serving senators from the U.S. Senate, more than 1/10 of the Senate, in one room for 2 days, actually willing to engage and to talk, and not simply to echo what President Trump and his vice president have said. I think that was an interesting demonstration of the fact that American democracy at work. There were Republican senators from the party that has elected this president who actually found it the right thing to do in Munich to present their own views. Of course, I'm thinking especially, but not only, of Senator McCain and Senator Graham. So I think that was really good and extremely rewarding for us. It was a demonstration of that America, that even the Trump administration understands that Europe is important, that it makes sense for us to go there with such a heavy, large number of people.
Okay, so now we have to kind of move forward, and we have other meetings coming up, G7, NATO, G20, and so forth. And the context of the American positions will continue to evolve, and more voices and more people, and I think it's important that we all engage with them. Let me ask you two questions. What Europe can do at this point, and a lot of people are saying, as we talked about it there, get your act together, be able to talk to the United States on eye level. You have a lot to offer. Don't preach to the U.S. Just talk about what's in your interest. Is that something, given the fact that you have very unpredictable election results in France, you've got your own election in Germany coming up, you've got a lot of tectonic shifts going on. Is it plausible that Europe can get its act together in a way that can talk to the United States uniformly? Or, because I fear that if it's not, that the U.S. could get either impatient or simply say, we'll deal bilaterally. How is that going to play out?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Europe, the EU, is currently not in a very pleasant situation. We have all these centrifugal forces. We have uncertainties about the upcoming elections. We have challenges like from the government in Hungary and the government in Poland. We have unresolved financial issues in Greece. We have Brexit. Yeah. So we're not looking very strong and very united. So that's a real challenge. Yeah. At the same time, let's not underestimate the European Union. I think what the EU, in response to your question, what the EU should do at this moment is stand up to President Trump and tell him, we are actually 500 million compared to your 350 or whatever million. We have an agenda which includes, for example, that we should stand together in terms of the rules of the game in trade for our mutual benefit. How can we, if TTIP isn't the solution to these questions, how can we work together to move that issue forward? The climate, the Paris climate discussions, I think that the EU will be united, or the representatives of the European Union, as they come to Washington or engage with the Trump administration, will be united in telling the Trump administration, don't abandon Paris. Equally, the Trump administration will hear one view on the Iranian nuclear deal. Don't abandon it. Even in the Middle East, you don't find many voices who would advocate abandoning it, maybe with the one exception of President Netanyahu, of Prime Minister Netanyahu. So I think it's not that Europe has no united positions on anything, but I will grant to you that we are not in a perfect position. This is why it is so important. It is one of our greatest strategic issues at this moment that the United States not drop American support for the idea of European integration from the U.S. foreign policy agenda. We would not have the EU as a strong and reliable partner of the United States today if it had not been for a generation-old American support. We need to find the best possible way to convince President Trump that in his own best interest, the interest of the American people, this support should be for European integration should be maintained and maybe even strengthened at a moment of crisis.
I mean, to some extent, the question mark is revolving around the proverbial burden-sharing question. Who does what, you know, and there's been this discussion about 2% in NATO. I know you've made a very interesting suggestion that it should be 3%, thinking not just about military. I think that's probably right. What mistakes do you think the United States can and should avoid in getting to that point where they're taking Europe seriously? What do you think stands in the way of the U.S. doing that? You've just said what the Europeans have as challenges. What do we have as challenges?
Well, I think that the U.S. should carefully avoid to make things look as if an increase in defense budgets in Europe is going to be interpreted as something which the Trump administration is dictating to Europeans. If we do this right, if we want to do it right, we in Europe need to explain to our voters that we do this not because Mr. Trump wants us to do it, but we do it in order to guarantee the security of our citizens and our borders. I think that is a very important point. If we don't want to see develop in coming months in an election year in a number of countries, yet again, a politically divisive debate where one side argues pro-America, let's do what Trump wants, and the other side says exactly the opposite. I think that would be disastrous for our political election campaigns, and it would be disastrous for the European-American relationship in general. So let's let's be smart about it, and let's make sure that we take these decisions because they are in our interest, and let's also be clear about that. Of course, we in Europe we should raise our defense budgets, but there are plenty of other complementary measures that we can take. For example, what we call pooling and sharing, creating synergy effects, buying military equipment together rather than separately. It's been said many, many times that we in Europe have the luxury of having 7 times more models of military equipment than the United States. No wonder our money is not as efficiently being spent as that of the U.S. So there are lots of ways how we could do better, be a stronger partner for the U.S. And I think it would be wonderful if the United States were not only to tell us spend more, but if they were to tell us spend it more efficiently.
I think to some extent, Wolfgang, that question should also be raised on our side of the ocean. I mean, we're talking about raising our
right.
It's all about capacities, not just about quantity. You know, you sound a little bit like you and I talking as if we were back in 2002. when we had that conflict between the United States and Germany over Iraq. You feel echoes of that now? I mean, the potential for echoes of that sort? That's what you're warning against.
I see the potential. That's
Yeah.
why I'm raising the issue.
Right.
I think the kind of a clash can be avoided if we handle this issue with care.
Right.
And if we try, for example, to package this upgrade of our military effort if we repackage it and present it as a key part of a larger effort to be able to do more to prevent crises, to stabilize regions. Everybody understands today that if you want peace in Afghanistan, you need this. You need your military capabilities, but you also need to be able to spend money on development, on schools, on infrastructure, etc. In that sense, successful security policy requires a multi-pronged effort, and I think that would be an approach that would be far easier to sell in a European environment that is not generally so positive about the military budget as is maybe the American electorate.
Right. Not so one-dimensional. You know, I feel coming out of, if I was to answer my own question about what I took back from Munich, it is, yeah, reinsurance, but renewal. And thinking about what this bargain now looks like in 2017, after 7 decades. Renewing what it is that how, where, when, and why we need each other. And I think, as far as I can interpret what you're saying, this isn't just for those people in the room in the Bayerische Hof. This is for millions of citizens in Europe and the United States, but also in Europe, where there is also a question mark of what's the next step for Europe? What's the next step for us as a European project? That's a major question for you. I think that in our case, we have a constant debate about how much we should be doing stuff at home and how much foreign policy requires global responsibilities. One of the things that I did not agree with Mr. Trump was when he said, I'm only representing the United States. That is not true. We are, by definition of what we are as a power on the global stage, in need of understanding global responsibility, but so is Europe, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think that in this current situation with so many questions about the future of global governance, of the functioning global order, a rules-based international system, as they say, we need to invest in that. And one of our worries is that maybe the Trump administration needs to be on a learning curve to understand that it's not only the short-term deal that is important here, but also the long-term investment in the international system. In that sense, I totally agree that while, of course, President Trump is right, he has been elected to lead America, but America needs to recognize that if it is not playing a leading role in running the world, no one else will in the same way. And of course, we also need to be frank about one other thing. It is, of course, not not a God-given or a natural situation that for more than half a century, 500 million Europeans have outsourced key elements of their security to the partner on the other side of the Atlantic. So it is an important question. What can we do more in order to make the burden smaller for the Americans? But of course, the answer to that question is we can do a lot to make the burden smaller, but we cannot, in our own interest, cut the umbilical cord. If, of course, the single most important question is the nuclear. We will continue to need, there is no alternative, the American military nuclear guarantee for Europe. But in many other areas, I think Europe needs to come up with an answer to the question, do we wish to have our security outsourced to Washington for the next 50 years? that's probably not a sustainable position. So we need to do more. And what President Trump has said about this, I think we should interpret as a wake-up call. Yeah, let's do something about it. He has a point.
And that means that we not only have to define the burdens, but we also have to define the goals, it seems to me.
Exactly.
And for citizens to know that they have to do more, they have to know why. And I think in some ways on the United States side, there are people, for example, in the Congress who might say, yeah, I have to explain that to my citizens. If we're going to spend more to defend Europe, why is that so important, and is that something that is on an equal basis? And I think if we can get there, then understanding what the burdens are become that much more easily to explain to a somewhat uneasy public.
I mean, I would think that one point would be relatively easy to explain to voters on both sides. It's pretty clear today that even the United States cannot provide answers to all the challenges that the United States faces. If we agree that we have a climate challenge, the United States can't handle that thing alone. We need to have some global agreement how to tackle that. Same thing with terrorism. If we want to do this successfully, we need to partner. The United States needs partners in the region and other partners. And I think my hope would be that the Trump administration would relearn what other preceding administrations have always known, namely that among the partners that are available to the United States, the Europeans may be sometimes, rather obnoxious and sometimes behave in an unhelpful way, but in the long term, they've always been, and they will continue to be, the best and most reliable and always present partners of the United States in addressing these questions of the global commons and of our common global interests in eliminating future conflicts. We need a stable global environment if we want to have prosperity for our citizens in Europe, for those in the United States. In other words, the shared interest, the dimension of the shared interest has not diminished.
Right. So the sum, as we always like to say, is greater than its parts, right?
Exactly.
Thank you, Wolfgang, for being here.
Thanks. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jack. Okay.